In this video, we're going to introduce a really neat tool called the pivot table. It exists in many spreadsheets, and in this video we're going to look at the pivot table that's inside Microsoft Excel, version 2010 to be specific. Okay, first of all, when you look at a pivot table or see someone using it, I know this was the case for me many years ago, it looks really complicated. It looks like something that only really technical people would use for really kind of special applications that aren't applicable to what you do. Well, really, in reality, it really isn't that complicated. The secret is to play with it a little bit and wait for that click. Once it clicks, you can very quickly build your own pivot table and, secondly, get really practical information out of it much more quickly than if you had to manually massage the data. It automates the process of getting some great information from data. But don't take my word for it. I'm going to prove that with some real-life cases. The first case is a scenario that's true to life. It comes from when I was a Cub Scout leader and I was in charge of crunching the results from something called the Pinewood Derby. Those of you in Cub Scouts know this to be a race where the kids build little cars out of wood and we race them down a track. In this case, we had run them down in heats of 4 cars, and we had this computer program that would measure to the 10,000th of a second the time it took to go down the track. At the end of the race, we had all kinds of award, for top 5 fastest cars and what's the fastest rank, and you have to do that very quickly because you have a bunch of people waiting around wanting to hear the results. So it couldn't be more practical, and it was a real-life example where I used a pivot table in under a minute get information out of it that would have taken much longer that didn't have the pivot table. Let's look at the data. What you see in front of you is a Excel table of Pinewood Derby race result, and each row here corresponds to a car running down the track. This is real data. The names have been changed, protect the innocent, but the times and even the date and time when the run was completed are real data from when I was in Scout. So each row corresponds to a Scout. It includes information about them like their rank and their name, and then what heat was run and what lane. There were 4 lanes on this track, has their car number, and then the time for that particular run it took to run down the track when it was completed. I have this data across 2 years, from 2005 and 2006, when my sons were in Cub Scout. That explains the data, and this data is really well structured to do a pivot table. Okay, so I have someone breathing down my neck, and I want to know what rank had the fastest average time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and quickly produce that. We'll break it down later, so don't worry if you're not following it. I just want to demonstrate how quick this tool is. So the insert pivot table. This table is already highlighted because I was on it at the time. Okay, there's 4 parts of a pivot table, and I want the rank to be in the row labels. I want the time, and I want the average time. Go down the track, and then that's all I need, and then I want to sort from the fastest to the time. So boom, I don't know if that was under a minute, but I now know that the wolf rank had the fastest time, then came tiger, then came bear, and then came webelow. So, and this did not exist before. This was automatically created. So we saw how fast we went from hundreds of rows of data to the answer to the question. Okay, this time we're going to create our pivot table on this Pinewood data. Again, this time we're going to break it down and go more slowly. All you need to do is click anywhere on the table, go up to your ribbon here, and do Insert, click Insert, and the leftmost option is Pivot Table. So you click that, and it's automatically selecting the table on. You can see these this flashing kind of dotted line that encompasses the whole table. You can also at this point select a specific range of data that you want to analyze too, but the easiest thing is just to be in the table itself and let Excel, and Excel will assume you want the table. Okay, so where do you want the pivot table to be placed? I want to create it in a new worksheet. So if we look down at the bottom here at this worksheet, it says Data Pinewood, and right next to it is Outline. And to the right is orders data. You're going to see a new worksheet be created. So I'm going to click OK. And boom, you see the sheet 15, which a minute ago didn't exist. And there's the Data Pinewood. Okay, so this, I know the first time I ever saw a pivot table years ago, I was really daunted by it. It's actually pretty simple. And once you practice with your own data a couple times, it will click. You'll really understand it. So please don't be discouraged if you're not getting this. You will with a little bit of persistence, and it really won't take that much time for it to click. Okay, so a pivot table has 4 parts to it, 4 sections, if you will. A report filter, row labels, column labels, and values. And they're pretty descriptive to what they are. So let's start with values. Values is, think of it as the number you're dealing with, because pivot table is all about calculating things. So what are we really interested in? This is a race. So the really key number here is the time and the number of seconds it takes to go down the track. So I'm going to take my mouse up here and I'm going to point it to time, and I'm going to left drag it into the values section. And you can see what happened over here in our pivot table. A value came in and it's saying sum of time. So in that table, in this table over here, you have this time column. What we have here is the sum of all the times over all the races and all the cars. So that's a starting point. So let's move on to row labels. Row labels is just what it sounds like, and I'm going to go ahead and put rank in there because it's a lot easier to explain when it's actually there. So I'm going to drag rank down into row labels. And now those of you familiar with Cub Scouts know that these are the ranks in Cub Scout: bear, tiger, weevil, and wolf, corresponding to the age of the kids. So now you can see we have a sum of time by rank. Okay, so now we've seen the row labels, what they look like, and they're labeling a row, and the data is getting calculated based on how you sliced it up or diced it up into ranks. Okay, so let's next focus on report filter, and as we saw in the example before, this was all we needed to answer the question, what was the fastest rank. We needed to convert this to an average, but we'll do that soon. In fact, let's do that right away. In the values here, I'm going to click down here, and I'll move my mouse around so you can see where I am. And there's this thing called value field settings, which has a lot of things you can do. But for right now, we're just going to click on average. So instead of a sum of the times, which doesn't really help very much because the sum, there's different numbers of boys in the different ranks, so sum doesn't really tell us anything. So I clicked average, and now this actually tells us the question that I mentioned in the quick video, which is which rank had the fastest times. A pivot table is a table. It can, just like anything else in Excel, it can be sorted. So I'm going to click on my data ribbon and then sort this A to Z, which means smallest to largest, and then we're back to where we were with the quick example, where wolf was the fastest and the weevil was the slowest rank. Okay. So we now hopefully have a pretty good understanding of the 2 of the 4 sections, the row label and the values. Let's move on to the report filter. I mentioned that the data I have is actually from 2 years, the 2 years that as a scout leader that I helped with the Pinewood Derby. So we know there's 2 years, and so all this data that we're looking at right now is across or summing both those years. And we want to maybe only look at 1 year. So the report filter is kind of what it sounds like. It's a means of filtering the data. So I drag the year. Let me do that again. And anytime you want to throw something away, you just drag it off to the side. So I click on year and drag it down the report filter. And you can see now I can choose 2005. And we can see in 2005, Wolf was still the fastest, but Webelos was in second place and Bear was in last place. See what happens if we look at 2006. In 2006, who was the fastest? We click and sort by the average time, and we see Wolf, it was the fastest. Okay, now we've looked at 3 sections of the pivot table. The report filter is what we just looked at to look at years. The row labels, which is what it sounds like, divides up the data by rows, and then the value section, which is the numerical data that we're really analyzing. Okay, so now we have this one section remaining, column labels. Let's get back to all years. Say you don't want the 2 years all mushed together, but you want to look at them at the same time. The column labels will allow us to do that. So I'm going to take the year and I can just move it from report filter over to column labels, or I'm just going to get rid of it. And if I was starting from scratch, I can just drag it down from up here from my field list. Okay, so now we can see 2005, 2006, and then the average over the 2 years. And so we can see differences between the years. So now in one chart we can compare year over year. We can see that in 2006 the average time went down, and there's actually a reason for that. A bunch of the parents got together and we had like a homemade rickety wooden track, and we did a lot of work to smooth out the rough parts and the seams and everything. So the track was actually a lot smoother in 2006, and the data show that. We have just gone through and shown all 4 sections of the pivot table and an example where we got some very valuable information. One more thing, if we look at this data, it's got a lot of decimal places and we want to format it a little nicer. If we recall before, when we went down to the value section down here and we went to field settings to turn it from sum to average, that's where you basically do anything like formatting that data. So in this case we want to format it so it's a little easier on the eyes. So right in here, once we click on, let me do that again. Okay, so I'm going to click on the little triangle here by average of time in our value section and go to value field settings, and then I'm going to go to number format. Let's say I just want to see it as a number and I want to see it to 2 decimal places so I don't have to see all those extra decimal places. Hopefully that'll be enough. So I did that and it looks a lot cleaner, but unfortunately you can't really tell the difference between Wolf and Tiger in 2006. So let's go back in there. Let's bump it up to 3 decimal places and see if that helps. And this is just setting how the data displays. It's not changing the data itself. So okay, so 3 seems pretty good. It differentiates all the data enough, and then it's nice and clean. Everything lines up and we're not looking at a whole bunch of digits that we don't want to see. So that's a real basic overview of a pivot table, and it shows how it can be really of real practical use.